Hello and welcome to yet another episode of Trashfuture. It is me, Nate, filling in for Riley, who's on a holiday far away from the United Kingdom. Today is not the bonus one. It is, in fact, the free one.
He's in a unique microclimate. It's the free one.
Exactly.
Riley can't stop me. You're listening to The Gunge and The Gunge.
To bit. There.
Exactly. Yeah, I wrote notes for this episode. We've got a guest on this episode, but we're just going to fight the urge to just do bits nonstop and not talk about anything on the subject matter. So
you're going to fight the urge.
Yeah. Well, and also, crucially, I am not in the studio right now. So what that basically means is they can just go hog wild and mute me if they want to. But I have, today, it is myself. It is, of course, Milo and Hussein in studio. We have Alice Caldwell-Kelly on the distant lines in Glasgow. And we are joined from the greatest city in the world, New York City, by Alex Yablon.
Number one, baby.
Number one. Classic slice. Mets World Series. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome to come on. Yeah, we're happy to have you today. So Alex has written some great stuff about municipal financing and a lot of just the state of how things are called too expensive even when we need them in society because of neoliberalism. That's kind of a potted summary. We're going to talk about that. But before we talk about that, we have to have a special bulletin update because our friends at Lordstown Motors have finally done it. They claim they are actually going to be able to build an truck single truck that a couple of their clients who have paid in advance a long time ago are going to receive an electric pickup truck sometime early next year.
The pickup truck will be delivered to them from the top of a very large hill, and it will appear at an increasing velocity.
Exactly. Their clients, a guy who owns a muffler shop in Ohio, have been quoted as saying, "Oh no."
So effectively, over the past couple of months, all has not been well with Lordstown Motors. Their CFO and CEO have both resigned. They basically had to do an emergency round of funding. They got some funding from a venture capital firm, or a private equity firm, rather, that dumped $400 million into their company so that they might be able to produce a single electric truck. I'm going to read quick stuff from this press release that I found about this. Effectively, they said, executives struck cautious tone in the second quarter earnings call as they tried to assuage shareholder concerns and address the near-term realities, bring its first vehicle to market without any revenue to offset its costs. Lordstown's approach, at least this quarter, was to try and reduce operating costs from the previous quarter, helping it offset its increase in capital expenditures. Lordstown reported a net loss of $108 million, which is a 13.7% improvement from the first quarter loss of $125 million.
It's getting better, you know? Yeah. We've managed to only lose $100 million this year.
It's net
Lordstown Motors getting the coveted Trashfuture Most Improved badge.
Its net losses are more than tenfold higher than the negative 7.9 million. So a loss of 7.9 million.
That might sound like a lot of net losses, but you got to look at this from the other side. That's a hell of a lot of net lessons. You know what I'm saying?
Fuck you.
They've learned so fucking much.
Man, I can't see you, but I knew that you were going to go there.
We worked together a lot.
Yeah.
I was just I could tell from the confidence in your voice kind of drawing out that sentence that it was going to be all my losses as lessons. So I just want to point out, we don't really have a lot to talk about with this. We do, however, need to reiterate that this company went public via SPAC and was at one point valued at $1.6 billion without having ever produced a single vehicle.
Yeah, because the market really wants an electric truck and nobody can build one.
Yes. You know, someone's got to do it. The Cybertruck looks like you've turned the polygon count really low because your graphics card is glitching. I don't know. I mean, this kind of looks like an old Mazda pickup truck. It just doesn't exist. So there are problems with each, unfortunately.
You know what? Like, I have a very sort of ignorant observation, but also one that's rooted in truth, which is very much like, look, if the guys on Pimp My Ride could like make cars with like 2 TVs and a fish tank in them, like it can't be that difficult to do a self-driving electric like truck.
Yeah, it shows how much lazier engineers have gotten since the era of Pimp My Ride.
That's true. They don't have Tim Westwood to motivate them like in Pimp My Ride UK
or Exhibit in the United States. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they need Exhibit to go and like hype them up.
Yeah, the Great Exhibition. Yeah.
Alex, I don't know if we're about the same age, but I feel like I'm part of the micro generation for whom having a PS2 in a car was like the coolest fucking thing. So, I guess.
I definitely like. My parents only ever got me a PS1, and so like PS2, they were like, "What do you need PS2 for? We got the PS1." Not that they actually sound like that, but like that's that's how
PS1s are worth a lot these days. Yeah. So like they were, I think they were onto something.
I reckon I've still got one somewhere.
But I mean, like one thing I don't get about these like EV startups is like, Ford's gonna do this. Like Ford's got they're gonna roll out theirs at the same time. They've just eaten the lunch of Tesla and Lordstown and these like fly by night, and it's like actually the boring old companies.
I have an answer, which is that like all of these things, in order to attract this investment, have decided to do the same thing, not in like the more sort of like reasonable way of we're going to beat Ford or whoever to market, but in the we're going to do some weird baroque shit. So the Lordstown Motors trucks deal was that the motors were in each wheel.
Okay.
Fuck yeah.
That shit did not work ever, and also it kept setting the wheels on fire.
This is like your own personal like F-35 or something like.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we did an episode on this with Brian Quimby from Street Fight Radio about the idea that they were like, we're gonna revive this Rust Belt community with an American-made electric vehicle. The problem is that it's a walking fire trap. That also, if I remember correctly, the engines were in the wheels. They caught on fire, and its brakes didn't function, so it would just roll downhill, or like its engine didn't actually generate any. They weren't able to make it work. I'm sorry, I'm distracted. A neighbor cat has sneaked into my fucking house, and I'm watching this cat try to get out the window. So I'm going to let you guys do some riffing and talk about electric cars.
I have a toddler, and we just got a book from the library about a delightful cat that is sneaks in and out of his London terrace blocks, different townhouses, and has a different. So I'm just assuming you're a character in my kids.
No, I think the real message of that book is that houses need better borders and better border control.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, we need a volunteer border force for Nate's garden.
Yeah,
that's right. Oh my god, did you see that they made the volunteer border force real?
Yes. Yeah.
Incredible.
Hussein, you were the one who told us about this,
yes,
right? What's going on with this?
So, what's his name? But he's the kind of like head of the Labour group in Ashford, which Alice, you might be familiar with, but anyone who is familiar with the People's Republic of Kent will be aware of both Ashford and the place that it occupies, especially in its proximity to Dover. So the head of the Labour group in Ashford CLP basically put out a tweet that went along the lines of, in order to stop the migrants coming in from Dover, maybe we should have a volunteer border force in order to because the new kind of like right-wing thing is that I can't remember what it's called, but the kind of the boating service that kind of helps
the RNLI.
Yeah, the RNLI.
Those fucking snowflakes in the RNLI.
Yeah, so they're apparently
lifeboat snowflakes.
So they're apparently snowflakes, but also like hardline identitarian communists. And the only way to stop them is to get blokes down the pub to form volunteer anti-migrant armies.
Sorry, did you say that this is that this is Labour putting together?
Yes. A Labour local politician has suggested we use local people from the town and we form them into
geezers.
His comparison was the Home Guard from World War II.
So I've got the tweet. Yeah, I've got the tweet here. I'm just going to read it out. So this is Brendan Chilton, and he says, here's an idea. It's quite clear the Channel migrant crisis is not going away. The government haven't got a clue. How many people arriving and then disappearing? Perhaps we need to form some sort of, quote, Home Guard, voluntary, to support the Coast Guard, police, border force,
he included voluntary. So
yes.
Just so you know, he's not going to draft you into this.
Yeah, I mean,
that would be very funny.
Yeah, I mean, like, you wouldn't be the modern Labour Party if, like, even with your, like, bizarre state fund or, like, your bizarre kind of border force that they have to be voluntary, because that
in order to get your like Duke of Edinburgh Gold Award, you have to do some volunteer border guarding.
You know, I have to say, like, I'm always really grateful for the existence of the Labour Party, because it makes me feel a lot better about myself having to vote for the American Democratic Party. Like, that's like...
I'm really excited for the
voting for the Labour Party, and I haven't. I still do it reflexively, and every time that's a like, that's a dark experience.
I'm very excited for the Volunteer Border Force biopic film where they have to get Jason Statham out of retirement to lead the Volunteer Border Force, and then he's just like, I've retired, and also I've only ever hunted nonces. I don't know anything about the border. They're like nonces, Jason, but for borders. They're trying to nonce the country. All right then.
If you put it that way.
That's right. That's how it be.
The thing about the Labour Party is that while for a brief 4.5 year span, the leadership was captured by the left of the party. Basically, there's about 30 people in the Labour Party who aren't insane authoritarians. And basically, now that Corbyn is gone, done and dusted, they have returned to their original form, which is punch left, punch migrants, punch people on benefits, and why is country not voting for me?
And kill alpacas. Yes, that's their other party trick. Keir Starmer weighing in entirely unprompted in a sort of like minor silly season scandal. There's this alpaca, right, which has bovine tuberculosis. And the Conservative government have said, okay, you have to like kill this alpaca. This alpaca has to be put down for public health reasons. Which, fine, regular, like, public health, agricultural decision, whatever. The owner doesn't want to kill the alpaca, and so this alpaca, named Geronimo, has been dragged through all of the newspapers. And then, just as this was sort of petering out, and they were going to kill the alpaca, Keir Starmer, in his role as sort of like sacrificial alpaca for this government, just like threw himself on this grenade and just went, well, I welcome the government's decision to murder this alpaca.
Geezer Keir Starmer.
But I call on them. I welcome the government's decision.
Go further. Look, I think here in the Labour Party, what we need to do is say to alpacas, whatever kind of wool that they have, that they are welcome here in Britain as long as they go through the proper channels. And I think some alpacae, if you will, they're trying to jump the queue ahead of a lot of alpacas who have applied for residency in this country and maybe being prioritised for reasons of their need. And I think that cannot be allowed to happen. And those alpacas should be humanely destroyed.
He's in the sun as heartless Keir Starmer right now, which is great because there was no reason for him to say anything.
But it was amazing too, is if I remember correctly, the quote that he gave was, "I'm afraid it seems there's no alternative to killing Geronimo the alpaca." I was like, did you just do Thatcherism? There's no alternative but about a fucking petting zoo? Like,
I would have preferred if he had come out like John Cena, you know.
I fucking love it here.
Oh, compromised Geronimo the alpaca. Yeah. Well, but both Bin Laden and this alpaca both codenamed Geronimo when they're about to be killed. Very a little bit of resonance there.
Well, you know what? We've talked about Lordstown Motors. Alex, you and I had a conversation, and I wanted to give you a chance to address this just before we move on to your piece about a lot of people are invested in the idea that if you just make every car electric, then climate change goes away because we no longer have a problem. And I recognize that's electric cars, to my eyes, are pretty like, there's a lot of people buying them here. There's a lot more infrastructure here. There's not like the Tesla infrastructure, but because distances are shorter, like for most people's journeys.
The government have like announced that they're going to do an iconic charging point design.
Yeah, they're going to make the red phone booths, but for and it's going to be so bad. We know it's going to be an oblong red thing.
I hate it when there's tramp piss in my Tesla charging port.
I'm excited for a little Thomas Heatherwick on every parking spot. I think,
my God.
that's...
apparently because of all the lockdown binge watching from toddlers and slightly older children of Peppa Pig, if they just do a Peppa Pig themed charging point, Britain's going to have so much fucking tourism for the next 20 years. Like
Peppa Pig on every street. You plug your electric car into like the snout.
Yeah.
But I was going to ask you the question, though, about this conundrum that getting across, that having electric cars does reduce emissions, but that doesn't mean that you do away with all of them because steel, carbon intensive. That was what you told me. I know nothing about it, so I wanted to pick your brain about that.
I like the fact, it's certainly like way better to have an electric vehicle than it is to have an internal combustion engine. But at the end of the day, like, the cuts that you have to make are so intense. Like, it's still like an electric vehicle is still like a 2,000 to 4,000 pound hunk of steel. And we don't really have like a non-carbon intensive way to make steel. And I mean, I guess, like obviously you're not then burning tons of fossil fuels once you make it. But you're still like, you gotta make 2,000 pounds worth of steel. Then you got to transport it probably on a non-electric shipping, mega shipping boat.
This is why my political position, my sole political position, that more cars should have 70s style wood grain on them is so strong, is that we just make more and more of the car out of wood.
Let's make Morgans.
Balsa wood is
Everyone
really
has to drive an electric Morgan.
Right, yeah, exactly. It's like, what would really be low carbon is just living somewhere where you don't need a car at all and can walk places and bike places. And I mean, this is like
there's
a very
not a
tedious...
huge amount of steel in a bicycle, right?
I mean, there's some,
especially if you've got a carbon framed one, like a cool guy,
right? Yeah, exactly.
Like a business guy.
But even like an old school steel bicycle is still like, what's it gonna weigh, like 20 pounds maybe?
Yeah,
it's just...
I would say also, to me, the solution is clearly we have to prioritize retrofitting old cars and just dropping batteries in them, so we just keep reusing the same frames, because that will allow me to have an electrified Nissan Micra, but with an insane range, and then my dreams will fucking come true.
What is it with you and the Nissan Micra, Nate?
They're just so weird, man. We don't have them in America.
Nate and I have both fallen in love with the same car with a different sort of body kit on it, because what I want, and this is now retro because it was made in the 90s, is a Nissan Figaro, which is a Micra with a retro body kit on it. I want one of those, but it goes for like 500 miles on one charge.
Yeah, the Proclaimers car.
Well, how Cuba has these medical experts that they send around the world. What they should do is they should send around the world all the Cuban mechanics who are really good at keeping like 1950s era boat-sized cars in like perfect working condition, and just like teach everybody how to obviously they probably don't get any electric engines because of the embargo, but
the monkeys paw curls, and as a consequence, much like Cuba exports doctors to crisis zones around the world, the United States begins exporting car YouTubers.
Right, exactly.
If I could get an electric engine in a 90s Porsche, that would be kind of sick nasty.
Yeah, if I could, I'm just laughing at the idea that we find a solution, but it involves really old cars being retrofitted. So like Indiana's heyday is restored because everyone has to drive a Studebaker for some reason.
I'm like driving around in my Austin 7, but it makes zero noise.
Nate's 1996 Dodge Neon is the only thing that can save transportation.
Yeah, you can drive a personal car. You don't have to use public transport everywhere, but it has to be from one of the first 3 Need for Speed games.
Yes.
Well, that being said, we have done our update on Lordstown Motors. So I wanted to get a chance to talk about Alex, your piece in the New York Times that you recently had published back in July, in which you brought to the attention of their readers that the government did actually briefly, the U.S. government did briefly begin direct lending to municipalities. There were not a ton of examples of people taking them up on it, but it happened. And then an almost like perfect bipartisan consensus to shut it down immediately happened.
Right.
So I wanted to give you there's a couple of quotes here I wanted to read from your piece. I'm just going to read these 3 paragraphs, and then folks can react, and we want to get your opinion on what this actually means, because this has been like a refrain forever that like interest rates are so low that in some cases they're negative yield. Why are we not using this to finance stuff that we need, both for climate change and just unfucking America and Britain and other countries? And the answer is always like, nope, that is not possible.
Right.
It is simply
Don't
not
feel like it.
Yeah.
No.
So I'm going to read these paragraphs from the piece. You said, economists at the Fed have given glowing reviews to the central bank's emergency credit line to states and cities called the Municipal Liquidity Facility.
Yeah, the MILF.
Yeah, the MILF. Precisely.
We're sending MILFs to your area.
Yes. Yes.
Horny MILFs.
See, this is why I have to read it to you guys, because I would not have clocked that, but immediately you picked up on it. That's why you're born to podcast. Despite its soporific name, or its horny name, if you want to get into it that way, it was an unprecedented extension of fuck. It was
Do you want moan.wav?
Yes, if you wouldn't mind, Alice.
No, don't do moan.wav. This is not a bonus episode.
There we go.
God damn
There we go.
It was an unprecedented extension of the Fed's lender of last resort powers. It inserted the bank into the municipal bond market, which states and cities basically used to even out revenue streams and finance some large projects. And it was successful in its primary mission. The Fed's very entry into this market prevented its collapse and kept private lending flowing. It kept borrowing levels relatively near the pre-pandemic status quo. Still, because the Fed itself didn't offer very generous loan terms compared with private lenders, the MILF directly lent to only 2 borrowers, the state of Illinois and New York's MTA. Then the Republicans in Congress and the Trump administration shut it down in December. But in both its modesty and its success, the MILF suggested that something more radical and sustainable was possible. MILFs are always doing this. Recently, a growing chorus of economists, legal scholars, and policy experts has proposed a suite of initiatives that could replenish the public employment ranks, which have yet to recover from the Great Recession, and boost the credit lines of states and cities as the climate emergency deepens, all by relying on the inexhaustible monetary powers of the Federal Reserve. So the big summary is America is uniquely positioned with like the ability to invent money more so than any other civilization in history.
You're MILF rich.
The federal money printer does, in fact, go brrr.
Yeah.
But we are choosing not to.
Yeah, the federal money printer, in fact, goes, "You're a big boy for 18.
We are all the federal money printer's pool boy.
Right, yeah, exactly.
So, Alex, I welcome your thoughts on the summary there.
Yeah, sure. So, like, this is all, like, I like, sent this piece to, like, my... So I didn't really write about this stuff until like basically COVID hit, and I've since like spent too much time stuck in my home reading Adam Tooze and listening to Odd Lots and stuff like that, and obsessing over political economy. And so I guess this is now my beat. But like I don't know how it works in Britain with like funding for local governments in a crisis.
It just doesn't
happen.
It's shit.
Yeah, it's all volunteer border guards.
Right. But like the way, like I've been obsessed since I was like a teenager with like the New York City fiscal crisis and how that shaped the city and the
Was it like while you were at parties, I was studying New York fiscal policy?
Well,
and now you come to me for answers.
Well, actually, as I wrote in a follow-up newsletter, is that it's because of my interest in like going to like DIY shows in Brooklyn, and like wondering like why can't we all just hang out and go to punk shows all day? Why do they always get like destroyed? Why do these DIY venues always get like displaced by like huge condos or Vice's headquarters? And like, to understand why
the real
right,
punks.
To understand why my friends can't like just hang out and make an ungodly racket all the time for, and live in an extended adolescence forever. I had to understand like central banking and like municipal finance. And anyway, so like, I'm kind of, I'm really getting ahead of myself here, but like,
no, it's good. I want to throw something in there really, really quickly is that the New York City fiscal crisis in the 70s, I feel like is a hugely important point just because it was sort of the end of, if you could consider New York City, from my perspective, of having like any kind of semblance of a welfare state, that was really when it started to crumble. And I mean, I'm a graduate of a CUNY college, and yeah, like CUNY was free until 1976, I think. And then they're like, nope, tuition, we're doing it now. And it's never gone back.
Right.
And stuff like that, that here's this crisis that completely reshaped the city. And it's like, it's now treated as that's just how nature works.
Right.
MILFs are looking to fund college educations in your area.
So like for the first like 3/4 of the 20th century, from like the progressive era up until basically the 75 fiscal crisis, like cities that wanted to could fund like really good public services and, even like welfare provision. And like, not New York wasn't the only place that was doing this, but it was the place that was doing it like the biggest. And, like you had like CUNY, like Nate just mentioned, like, was free to anyone who graduated from high school in New York City, which, like that's a thing that didn't exist anywhere else in the country, like a city university that was free. And there was also like, top notch that was like had like Nobel laureates on faculty, and like they were able to do this because of like the structure of American finance, where like basically cities were funded by like these local local kind of city fathers and local banks that had like a really vested interest in their city's success.
Yeah, guys with Dutch names.
Guys with Dutch names, or like, the people who like owned the local banks who, like they basically like they needed to make sure their local real estate was still valuable. And,
yeah,
Yeeps von der Blumkin has been put in charge of the mill.
Right.
Yeah, the richest guy in New York until about 1970 is named like Bunny van der Vonk,
right,
or whatever.
But then like
yeah, he's a
this
clockhead.
kind of misunderstood part of this, and like I really recommend this book Fear City by the historian Kim Phillips Fine if you haven't read it, but it's all about the fiscal crisis. But a point that she makes, and something that I didn't appreciate until reading this, is like the whole way that cities finance themselves really changed in like the 1960s and into the 1970s. And you went from like financing this stuff, like with, and like particularly like big investments in like new infrastructure and like whole new agencies and public functions, with like, a combination of like local taxes and bond sales to local rich people and, banks loans from like local banks.
Yeah, cities kind of like running their own economy.
Right. Kind of like, all these lenders, they depended on the city succeeding for them to make them, to continue thriving themselves. Then in like the 1960s, like finance globalized, and financial institutions became these multinationals that had no loyalty to any one to any one location.
Yeah, the richest guy in New York is now like still called Bunny van der Vonk, but he's from the Netherlands rather than like
exactly. And like technically he works for a German bank that's really all like Russian money, and like they don't feel any kind of like they don't. And also they increasingly began to rely on the bond market as opposed to like local tax receipts, which you were vulnerable because of white flight and like capital flight and like outsourcing, and then like local bond markets. And like you had this kind of the rise of the kind of neoliberal financialization of everything in like the early 70s, which became the way of disciplining the public sector and what was deemed out of control spending, which was to say like spending that did not primarily juice corporate profits, or spending that could lead to increased worker bargaining power by, say, making higher education free for everyone.
And it briefly came back in a sort of a loophole thing because of the MILF, right? Because the Fed made this temporarily possible. Right. That you could like have this sort of like bond market back again, Only instead of like one old Dutch guy, it's the federal government and it's money printer.
Right, exactly. Right? And not even the money printer. It's kind of like it's the guarantee. It's like the Fed. So like the MILF only directly lent the two borrowers, like Illinois and the MTA, and because those both have like dog shit credit ratings. And it lent to them at like pretty onerous terms. But the real effect of the MILF was to like prevent everybody else from seeing their bond yields blown out. And so like everyone else who, like the state of New York and the city of New York, which is different from the MTA, like they were still able to get, bond financing on like as if COVID had never happened. And in fact, like in the middle of COVID, like the New York City did this bond issue and their bonds were oversubscribed. Like they could have taken even on even more debt at a lower rate if they had wanted to. And like that's because like the MLF said, like, look, cities will absolutely have money if they need it. No city is going to like go broke this year because of COVID.
Lender of last resort.
Right, exactly. And so they don't even have to make that many loans to like they just have the backstop. They just have to have this standing guarantee.
God, no wonder everybody hated it, because it's the last sort of like counter to the no such thing as society thing, right? It's like, the federal government does on some financial level care to prevent you from robbing these cities blind.
Right, exactly.
It's just like, it's more that they're taking an interest than it is to do with the substantive like loans.
Yeah, it's basically like they're saying to the bond market, like, look, please don't like, do not do Escape from New York, do not do Escape from Los Angeles. Like, there's no need for that.
There was no need to do Escape from Los Angeles the first time, frankly.
That's true.
There is a thing that I half remember, which I'm curious if anyone can like remind me about, which is, was there not an attempt to do this at the municipal level from like DSA and some other left organizations in California? Because I vaguely remember a sort of a people's climate bank thing, and then nothing
that's
really
super popular. I mean, I would say everywhere. And that's not even contained to DSA. Like these kind of ideas about like public banking and kind of like, basically like giving states and cities like a kind of a...
Wasn't Josh Androsky doing that?
Yeah, Josh Androsky was on here in 2018
bank.
for there was a referendum, I think, for public banking in LA. It did not pass.
Times where it becomes very difficult for me that I wipe my memory at the end of every show we record.
Oh yeah, well you I don't think you'd ever been on the show at that point yet, Alice. I was still in New York when you guys did that episode. So
I remember this because I was in Josh's house in LA and he was plying me with huge amounts of weed while enthusiastically telling me about this people's bank.
Right. I mean, that describes basically sort of like how I've gotten into this stuff over the past 2.5 years. Like, like this money stuff, like I had always assumed was very boring, but it does go very well with being stoned all the time.
But it's like it's a pincer attack, right? Because you have the People's Bank and stuff from like essentially the bottom up, like especially coming through like referenda and stuff. And then you have this, which is we're going to convince the federal government that this is a thing that it should impose on the market.
Right. Well, it's like it's not even that much of an imposition. It's like what's particularly wild about it is that it is like it was both unprecedented and like so easy for them to do. I mean, like so much.
Yeah, this is how far it's been rolled back. That like this incredibly bold thing that terrifies people is like the least you can do.
Right.
The dial has been turned so far back in one direction that like nudging it back one increment gives people panic attacks.
Like they made two fairly small loans and like, congressional Republicans were absolutely losing their shit and being like, this needs to be wound down immediately. And like, I mean, to their credit, there were a lot of like Democrats like around that time. I mean, and not even people like Ayanna Pressley has been like really big on like using, really radically changing how the Fed is sensitive to like, inequality and unemployment. And then like Sherrod Brown, but also like a total moderate squish like Mark Warner, from Virginia, who's like the richest member of the Senate and has like is famous for like having these like salons at his house with like deficit scolds. Even he was like, hey, like this actually worked pretty well. We shouldn't crush it. But also maybe he just signed down to it because Sherrod Brown was into it, and Sherrod Brown is the chair of this committee. But anyway, that's
it's a slippery slope. Like, first it's small loans to like make sissies like function at a very basic level. Next is Islam. So like,
right,
you can't take that risk.
Next to doing Islamic finance, no interest. It's all coming together, baby.
Alex, there is one thing I wanted to pull out of your piece that really interested me, which is that like there's a bit in there where you kind of suggest that part of the reason why this was able to happen until people noticed, like the reason why they were able to turn the big society dial back one notch was because it was boring and because the Fed was boring.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so much of what I think happened with the American response to COVID, like obviously it was awful in all kinds of ways, but Nate, we were kind of talking about this, like, we did a pretty good job of making the money printer go burr, and I think a big part of that is that of why that happened is that it's so it's so boring. Like you say budget, people's eyes glaze over. When you say liquidity, people are like, like when you say liquidity give people money, people are like, wait, what? Why is the money wet? Really, I don't understand that. Like
what's really, really funny to me is that there's a group of people who are not immune to this of just like being bored. And it's guys who actually work in finance.
Oh, yeah.
And it's so funny to me to have this realization for the first time that like a great deal of the sort of like whimsical bullshit schemes that we talk about on the show where like a finance guy just decides to like implode the economy because like guys who end up working in finance do not like it and want to do something else, but the money is too good to quit.
Right.
Sometimes one Australian man in an insurance office on the beach, it's just like, yeah, whatever. I'm not going to read the stuff I'm signing. That sounds pretty boring. Just going to sign
it. All of these guys hate doing actual banking stuff, which means you can kind of slip stuff by them sometimes.
Well,
it's delightful.
But in a perverse way, though, like those guys get it more than the like old school like neoclassical economists and the kind of like the Pat Toomey. Like it is just about like there's this flow of money and like it's not like you kind of like if you're kind of like in an advantageous position to like siphon off this part of the flow. This is like a really silly thing, but like have you seen the original like Oliver Stone Wall Street?
No, we're more of a JFK podcast.
I'm sort of familiar.
I'm familiar with it.
The SEC would have you believe that insider trading is illegal.
I saw it, but like for some reason I remember the sequel a lot more, the one of Shia LaBeouf. Which is just like an objectively very bad film, but it has some very funny moments in it.
I mean, the original Wall Street is like actually like it's weird. It's sort of a strange thing. Like, if you're more of a JFK fan to watch it and it's like actually like a pretty cogent movie, like it makes sense. It's like tightly made. There aren't like, it doesn't have like 3 different kinds of film stock. There's no like imagined gay orgy. It's just like a really good, like tightly made, like thriller for grown-ups. But anyway, at some point, like the Michael Douglas character says, like it's not like you own this stuff. You kind of position yourself well in the flow of money. And like most of for the past year and a half that I've been kind of like reporting on this stuff, like a lot of the people who live in work in Wall Street, like they don't subscribe anymore to the like Milton Friedman, Austrian stuff. They're all Keynesians because they know it's like, all these things are just policy levers and I can, that creates opportunities for me if you get that.
Yeah. Well, that does make sense. I mean, as Gordon Gekko says, greed is good and eating pussy is better.
Well, as he found out, there can be too much of a good thing.
They can. They really can. But I mean, that's a true way for a king to go out,
Well, he beat it. The real king shit.
Yeah, that's right. Because that is an act of faith. Like, you eat pussy so much that you know you're likely to get throat cancer from it, but you have faith that the gods of pussy eating will smile upon you and reward you for your service.
Well, so one of the points that you made, Alex, was that this was a quote from Claudia Sahm from the Jane Institute. This is what you close out the piece with, which is basically that she says, Toomey, Senator Pat Toomey and others get exercised because the Fed is competent. They'd get it done, basically. It's not like, oh, the government can't handle money kind of shit. It's like the neoclassical economists and the conservatives in this regard don't want people, from what I can read of this, for your opinion, would prefer people did not realize that there was, in fact, an alternative.
Yeah.
And that this is a demonstration, a small demonstration, but a sort of like a test case of, okay, well, if you made this actually, if the terms were better, if you didn't need the banks at all, then this was a thing that could solve this problem of how are we going to pay for it. And, I think about this too. Sometimes there's a part of me that's just like, because of the really insanely crippling debt that the MTA is saddled with, that's causing them to pay just enormous amounts of interest on really, really old debt that cripples their operating budget. It's like, if the government wanted to, they could just eliminate that debt tomorrow and put them on, like have it be completely change their operating budget, because they just wouldn't have to deal with it anymore. But they don't, because it's just sort of like, well, manage the finances like a household kind of shit. It's like, yes, but this is the biggest city in America and its economy depends on this thing functioning.
Do you ever think it's just really funny how a term as serious sounding as neoclassical economics just refers to people who refuse to understand how the economy works?
Yes.
Who are just like sticking their fingers in their ears and going, no, it doesn't.
No,
That's
there's
basically the same as
in those fucking rocks, and you can coax it out.
Yeah.
Basically the same as neoclassical architecture. So maybe just as a term.
Embrace
what's wrong with
tradition.
columns? Yeah. This isn't an
not
anti-column
understanding
podcast.
how shit works.
Yeah.
So the thing I wanted to touch on before we move on to our next segment was you on your Ghost page, the alternatives, a Substack that doesn't have a bunch of TERFs on it. You mentioned in exactly. You mentioned that one of the crises that American governance has faced since the Great Recession is the serious reduction of the workforce, like the federal, the state, the municipal workforce. And you described that this also continued under COVID. I'm going to read this paragraph as a segment from it that you say recessions devastate local public budgets and lead to brutal cuts to the kind of basic services that keep the social fabric from fraying. States can't avoid immediate cost cutting whenever revenues shrink, thanks to local balanced budgets amendments and restrictions on.
We don't have that in Britain.
Yeah, fuck.
Well, good job. That's just you guys over there.
And restrictions on borrowing that could make up for temporary shortfalls. The inability of localities to keep spending through recessions makes these recessions worse. The number of public employees also fell by 1.5 million from February to May 2020, and as of June 2021, it remained 1 million down from its pre-pandemic peak. That accounts for approximately 1 out of 7 outstanding COVID-related job losses. So, in your eyes, from what I understand, this is a potential solution to rebuild that workforce to make things not be shit anymore. Though, understand that in Britain since 2011, we've been also doing just slashing shit nonstop, and it has, as you might imagine, has led to a particular kind of local psychosis when people who never really had problems with the services they depend on are suddenly like, wait, I can't get my trash picked up every week like they used to, and things like that. Once again, it's just like this hardcore austerity economics. And so you're saying that if we can kind of force just crack the surface on this shit and get people to understand, like, there's literally no fiscal case why this has to happen, it could change the whole picture.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm not exactly, my understanding was that in Britain, like, the cuts to, and, obviously, like, you should correct me if I'm wrong, was that, like, there was this decision at the very top, like, in, like, 2011, 2010, we got to do austerity from the very top. And, like, that happens certainly in America. But, like, what I think I was getting at is, like, these American states and cities have these legal, like, these there's, like, state constitutional amendments, there's laws that kind of automatically trigger it, even if say you had like an ostensibly left-leaning governor, or like
we sort of have that too. Like they brought in some laws that basically govern how local authorities are allowed to like manage their budgets and stuff. So like local authorities aren't allowed to do things like, if they've got some money, build public housing with it. Like they're just not allowed to do that. Like they're not allowed to do anything that doesn't involve a private company.
And they fundamentally used to be able to, but they can't anymore.
I mean, like, are like the local authorities, like, are they funded by like local property taxes and local income tax?
No, that's the wildest thing here. They are funded by a flat sum amount tax that every tenant or resident has to pay. Landlords don't pay property tax in this country, but their tenants basically pay a fee for local services. So there's very few exceptions to it. Where I live, we pay our rent and we pay our utilities, and we have to pay £120 per month to our local council. But like, it doesn't matter what your income is. Basically, there's almost no exceptions to it.
You have to subsidize your council's alpaca.
Right. Well,
yeah, that's right.
Well, yeah, and since the 80s, they've made it much more restrictive. That was a thing that Thatcher did to cut the funding to local councils, but then also cut their ability to spend or to raise money. And so you're locked in this cycle where
they're not allowed to borrow money at all.
Yeah, like oftentimes they're not allowed to build public housing on land they own. They're not allowed to sell assets to then build public housing. Like, if I'm not mistaken, if they generate profits, it has to go to a national general fund. It can't go to the local council. Like, there's so many restrictions to basically make local governance intentionally underfunded here so they can keep privatizing it. And my impression is that, but we don't have the sort of madhouse of every state has its own thing. But yeah, being from the Midwest, the balanced budget amendments, I know that's a huge deal. And it's like, it basically legally hamstrings. Like, if you try to do something, it doesn't matter. It's going to get defeated in the courts because of these amendments.
It forces you to like lean into the punch of a recession, you know? Like, you have to do what every, like, you know, anyone who's like read the Wikipedia page on Keynesianism would tell you, don't do that. We have all these laws that force you to, like, in a recession, to slash public employment. So that just deepens the recession, because those are all people who were spending money and keeping businesses alive, and they have to cut back. And then, you know, like, you could, I mean, and this goes back to the New York City fiscal crisis, like pre-1970s, you know, states kind of were able to borrow to make up for shortfalls more aggressively. And I mean, this was a problem, you know, like, you can certainly abuse this. And like, even I would admit that, like, New York did. But, like, you know, the kind of, there's an attitude that, like, oh, these balanced budget amendments and these restrictions on like borrowing, even during a sort of like exogenous shock like COVID, like, you know, they're necessary. It's the harsh medicine that these localities have to take, and like, this must be because, you know, if they fall short, you know, well, there's no help coming for them. Even though things like the MLF show, like, you don't even like the Federal Reserve. The federal government doesn't even actually have to spend their own money to help them out. Like, they can kind of signal to private markets to invest in bonds.
Yeah, the government, the feds just go, hey, knock it off.
Right, yeah.
Hey.
Yeah.
And it works.
Hey,
kind of.
It's like, hey,
the invisible hand of the federal government.
Throw my little buddy something. Come on.
Yeah. It's amazing that we're kind of like running basically like every Western country into the ground over like a slavish devotion to an analogy that it turns out isn't an analogy that works. Right. Like, basically, like, yeah, well, a governmental budget is just like a household budget. And we've discovered that that's basically the same as saying, well, eating food is just like eating pussy. You should eat food the same way you eat pussy. You should like lick it about 100 times.
Several times
like,
a day.
Yeah, that's right. You should just lick the outside of your food sensually and never take a bite. And that's you know, you can't argue with it. They both use the word eating, so that's how you should do it.
And this is another hobby horse of mine that I'm getting on. I just wrote a column for Business Insider about this guy Pete Peterson. Do you know who he is?
Great name.
Yeah, I recognize the name. Yeah,
shouts out to that guy right off the top for a great name.
So he died in 2018. He was one of the co-founders of the private equity giant Blackstone, not BlackRock, Blackstone.
Or Blackwater.
Right, or Blackwater.
All of these have such like enticing names. I think.
Exactly.
Yeah, look into the Blackstone.
Right,
yeah, the big.
exactly.
We've talked about
Nothing
this before. They're
ominous
the company
about
that
the
built
Blackstone.
Circling Blackstone's offices.
Anyway, so
as part of my finance pilgrimage.
So he was like a he was in the Nixon administration as the commerce secretary and was like this like. He was like he and like Kissinger were like wingmen in Georgetown in like the 70s, like they were the only two people.
Nightmare blunt rotation.
Yeah, exactly. Terrible. Anyway, so he like used his government connections to like get into private equity and he became a billionaire.
What? That's crazy.
And then so the way that he fulfilled he did the like Warren Buffett giving pledge, and the way that he fulfilled the giving pledge is by giving his personal fortune to his personal foundation, which advocates for cutting government spending.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool guy shit.
And so like he's like he bankrolls, or his estate rather bankrolls all these think tanks like
from beyond the grave.
Exactly. Where his
now that right there is the invisible hand.
It's the invisible skeletal death grip around our
the
throats.
Invisible stranger jacking off the economy while it feels like someone else is doing it. Yeah.
So he's like the one, like he like like there's a paper trail. Like he's the one who like bankrolled all these nonprofits that like get quoted as if they're like totally nonpartisan in like newspaper articles that are like they kind of spread these cliches like the household metaphor. So like it's very like this thing isn't just like common sense that comes out of nowhere. It's like it's a political project spread by like one dead rich guy, and it serves very clear ends. But also like it doesn't even make sense, like from like on its own terms. Like how many households are there that can buy car without taking on debt, or buy a house without taking on debt, or like like, and every rich person knows that like the way you start a business is with someone else's money. Like no one ever you can't ever self-finance anything. Like that's for tightening your belt is for poor people. Kind of like paying taxes. Everyone needs debt to do anything, or credit, if you don't want to use the dirty word debt. Everyone needs like help. Everyone generally, like the way people get rich is by getting more generous terms of credit, not by like, abstemious self-denial and like, hiding cash under a mattress.
Being extremely smart.
Oh, right.
And having a lot of like leadership skills.
Right. Like that doesn't work.
No, I was told that you could get like really rich and successful by running a mom and pop store with good Christian values, and having your children work for free.
Well, right. That's the important part. Yes.
The problem is that everybody who's ever done that, who almost got rich, but then they were forced to bake the gay cake, and so the psychic trauma they took on stopped them from being able to become rich. So it happens every single time.
All I started with was some chutzpah and like some good business acumen and $400 million that I got from my father, which I assume is pretty normal.
Right.
So this is, I hope that little things like this force people to realize that not only can it be different, but here's an instance of it actually being different, in which we don't have to suffer this just idiotic penury for no reason. We don't have to be like, nope, the best that governance can be, and that social services or any kind of societal function can be, is shit that annoys you until you are rich enough to buy your way out of it.
Right.
I would like to hope that will change. However, bit of a segue, because there is a counterpoint. There's a particularly British counterpoint, if you will, to all of this.
Oh, no.
To the implications of getting rid of austerity and monetarism and all of this weird, the terrible metaphor of the family budget, or using the power of the central bank or the Federal Reserve to fight climate change. There's an even more British take, which is, what if we just give up? Because I have found an article from the New Statesman by a philosopher at Oxford named Roger Crisp called, and I'm not joking.
Roger Crisp. What a fucking name.
Roger.
Is he some like disgusting British flavor, like like vinegar and like
Yeah, I love to go to the British corner store and eat some like jambly wombles and a Roger Crisp.
Yeah, exactly.
Fantastic.
I like to Roger some crisps.
So I was going to say exactly. It's the fried potato slice that smells like sex. The article is entitled "Would Extinction Be So Bad?"
Jeez.
And it says,
Oh
"I'm not
wow!
joking."
I love black-pilled columnists.
I was pleasantly surprised that
This is kind of base.
that the New Statesman, the kind of like ostensibly left-wing magazine of this country, has kind of just taken the position of what if we all just gave up, which
what if we die?
which is kind of like the same position that the British Labour Party has taken.
Yes.
So.
There's no alternative to destroying Geronimo the
Yeah,
alpaca and everyone else.
There's no alternative to just dying.
It is worth destroying the earth if every alpaca is destroyed in the process.
One thing
That's right. Get rid of those smug woolen cunts.
I mean, one thing that really threw me for a loop about this is like, so I did like a very silly like study abroad program in London when I was in college, and like I spent one day like
You're a master of jumbly wumbles,
right,
now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Anyway, my like girlfriend at the time, now wife, like came to visit me. She had a family friend who was then a professor at Oxford, and like we took a day trip up to Oxford and like got to be shown into all like the secret faculty lounges that like tourists can't go into, and like
the eyes wide shut rooms.
This is where you get sucked off
right,
by your
exactly.
students.
This is where like I just assumed
Only
like
the male ones, however.
right. I just saw like Brideshead Revisited just taking place everywhere.
Yeah.
But
And Pride's Dome revisited.
One thing that really struck me, like, and I will, like, I know, like, this podcast is in large part about shitting on Britain, and rightfully so. But, like, I was, like, I still have some, like, part of myself that's a bit of an Anglophile. And, like, I know Oxbridge is, the reason for some of the greatest atrocities of the 20th century. And beyond.
Well, Alex, I mean, no one on this podcast knows anything about Oxbridge.
Right.
We absolutely would never advocate
and
saying that it was good or fun in any way.
Some people say some people say it's actually Doxbridge.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I would thank you to use the correct term. That's right. The honourable gentleman will please refer to Doxbridge by its full title.
I mean, this is all to say, like, if you're in at Oxford, if you're like, if you have one of those like, incredible offices, on like one of the old quads, like I would be like super strongly motivated to not give up on that. Like it's, like if you've got it, like it's really nice.
I briefly dated a girl who was a Marxist academic who had a fellowship at All Souls, which is like the really fancy, like you have to be a genius college at Oxford. Like it's like only postgrad, and you have to like sit like I'm doing scare quotes, but you can't see this, the hardest exam in the world to get this fellowship. And she got it, but basically they just throw infinite money at you.
Right.
You just get like, you get your own fucking office in the college, and they just give you, and so like, and they would randomly get grants to do certain things. Like, so she's like, yeah, the college just gave me $2,000 to buy new computers, so I'm just gonna do that, even though I really don't need new computers. She had like 3 different like fucking computers for like different parts of her life.
Yeah, I mean, like,
and I'm like, yeah, that's
if
kind of dope.
I were in on that racket, I would really want to not go extinct. It's pretty nice.
I would spend so much money on gamer chairs.
Oh yeah.
See, that's the thing, is that the surest cure for Anglophilia is to live here and not be in one of those sweet ass jobs,
Right.
because then you're like, wait, this is just people glassing each other in the face and a lot of vape shops. I'm going to read this piece because I know that
spending all your All Souls money on a NOS canisters.
I spent it all on like spice.
Yeah, that is actually a specific like ring fenced fund you do get from All Souls, is the NOS money.
So, Alex, this is a particularly British thing that you may not be up on, but people here love huffing nitrous oxide in balloons, or just out of canisters. So everywhere you go in London, especially in areas where there's more young people congregating, you'll just
areas
find
where
these
Trashfuture happens to have an office.
Yeah, there's just like these fucking piles of discarded empty NOS canisters. I'm constantly having to avoid them on my bike to not blow out my tire. Like, they're everywhere. But
we've got fentanyl here, okay? So like,
Yeah.
Fuck. So,
Yeah.
Roger Crisp says,
Get the MacArthur
This
Genius
is like
grant
we
and
have
spend
gun
on
crime and
fentanyl.
fentanyl, and you've got Nas cans and knives. I'm
Knife
sorry.
crime.
And paedophilia.
yeah, guys,
Let's not forget.
and guys who drive around in Mercedes from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. selling cocaine to anyone who texts them. Yeah, it's a different country.
On call, active till 6 a.m.
In recent decades, it has often been said that we are living in the, quotes, hinge of history, unquote, an unprecedented period during
we
which
live in a hinge.
a catastrophic event such as rapid climate change, nuclear war, or the release of a synthesized pathogen may bring an end to human and perhaps all sentient life on the planet. Most people think such an extinction would be bad. In fact, one of the worst things that could happen. It's plausible.
Actually, it's good.
The process
Yeah.
leading to various forms of extinction, and extinction itself would be bad for many of us, given that our lives are overall good for us, and that all else being equal, the longer they are, the better. But it's also plausible that extinction would be good for some individuals, those in the final stages of an agonizing terminal illness, for example, whose pain can no longer
Why
be controlled
does
by
this
drugs.
person sound like a character in a Socratic dialogue who's about to be owned?
I gotta keep going. This means one key factor in judging the overall value of non-extinction will involve weighing these disparate interests against each other. How might we do that? Let's focus on sudden extinction. Imagine that some huge asteroid is heading to Earth, which if it hits will remove any possibility of life on Earth. If you have the power to deflect it, should you do so from a moral point of view? If extinction would be bad for all sentient beings, both now and in the future, the answer yes seems hard to argue with. But as we just saw, that's not the case.
Guy who's only seen the film Armageddon. I'm getting serious Armageddon vibes from this.
See, the problem is that he didn't see Deep Impact. And I think you need to kind of see both
Yeah,
to kind of like get the pros and cons of what happens if an asteroid destroys the Earth.
that is true.
Consider the huge amount of suffering that continuing existence will bring with it, not only for humans, and perhaps even for, quote, post-humans, unquote, but also
if
sentient...
you meet the Buddha on the road, ask him to do a column in the fucking New Statesman.
Is Lucretius writing for the New Statesman now? Has Epicureanism made its way into the pages of the New Statesman? Are we trying to achieve a state of ataraxia by dying?
It gets worse, but also for sentient non-humans who vastly outnumber us and would continue to do so. As far as humans alone are concerned, Hilary Greaves and Will MacAskill at the University of Oxford's Global Priorities Institute estimate there could be 1 quadrillion people to come, an estimate they describe as conservative. These numbers...
How much money does the Global Priorities Institute take from the CIA? Because based on its name, I'm going to guess a lot. That is a deeply CIA-ass name.
These numbers and the scale of suffering to be put into the balance alongside the good elements in individuals' lives are difficult to fathom and so large that it's not obvious that you should deflect the asteroid.
This is your fucking brain on utilitarianism.
Nate. This is exactly like a slightly more academicized version of that graph you drew once to take the piss out of someone on Twitter, which was the graph that said degree of when you nut versus when she stops sucking. You drew a dotted line above the intersection and wrote the unknowable zone.
Yes, this is true. I was doing that to make fun of James Cleverly, who had drawn some bizarre, completely inscrutable
ironic nominative determination
chart about Brexit or something prior to Brexit happening. So basically he says these numbers and the scale of suffering to be put into the balance alongside the good elements in individuals' lives are difficult to fathom and so large that it's not obvious that you should deflect the asteroid. In fact, there seems to be some reason to think you shouldn't.
I would simply deflect the asteroid and then live off of the fact that I was the person to deflect the asteroid for the rest of my life.
Alice actually could deflect the asteroid, and we know exactly how.
That's right. That's right. We're going to need 1 bottle of Glen's vodka.
Yeah,
And the tallest woman you know.
Yeah, we're just going to need some hijabi women and some haram meats, and we can save mankind.
Just a little charcuterie plate. Yeah.
How can we make comparisons like these? C.I. Lewis, a leading Harvard philosopher in the mid-20th century, offered an intriguing thought experiment. To judge the value of some outcome, you have to imagine yourself going through the relevant experiences. Usually when we think about extinction, because we are not in great pain, we focus on the good things we'll miss. But if God were to offer you the choice of living through all the painful and pleasurable experiences that will ever occur without extinction...
I've changed my mind. Can I direct the asteroid at this guy specifically?
Yeah. It's going to have to be your most finessed nut yet, Alice.
Yeah, I'm going to do like a pool.
Blow.
Yeah, like a pool cue. I want it to I want to skim this guy off the face of the earth and nobody else.
Yeah. Basically, if God were to offer you the choice of living through all the painful and pleasurable experiences that will ever occur without extinction, would you jump at the opportunity? I have to say I wouldn't. There are, of course, many other ways of measuring value, more technical and precise than Lewis's thought experiment. Most of them assume that values can be compared against one another on a continuous scale. Imagine that you want the pleasure of being admired on the beach for your impressive tattoo, but getting it will hurt. So you balance the pleasure against the pain and decide to go ahead only if the first outweighs the second. Yeah, and that is why I have a tramp stamp that says "Jumpers hit it" on my lower back.
This guy's such a little fucking nerd.
I have a little line tattoo of the trolley problem on my bicep.
You know, when people talk about incels and stuff, like this is really the damage that is done to society when a guy doesn't get domed off for this long. Is that he writes an article like this and we have to read it.
But perhaps there are discontinuities in value. John Stuart Mill, for example, used to claim that some pleasures, such as enjoying some great work of art, are, quote, higher, unquote, than others, in the sense that no amount of lower pleasure, such as that of eating peanuts, could equal the higher pleasure and overall value.
Damn, this MF.
Just like a fucking Adam Carolla tweet, like, men today would rather eat peanuts than enjoy some great work of art.
That's right.
$20 can buy many peanuts.
Human experience may be very bad, but it also helps a lot of people get to work on time. So it's impossible to say whether or not.
Yeah. John Stuart Drill. Wait, here's an idea. Better guy, John Stuart MILF. Because the highest pleasure is admiring a MILF. Yeah.
Likewise, some planes might seem discontinuous in value with others. Imagine that the devil offers you the choice between...
Stop asking me to imagine things. Philosophy was a mistake.
This guy's fucking whapping through different philosophies. He's gone from like Epicurus, now he's on like Descartes.
This guy has poster's brain in the sense of like he will start like a thought experiment in a fairly kind of conventional way, and then just like out of nowhere he'll be like, imagine if the devil showed up and offered you a deal.
Yeah, join me.
Yeah.
Would you take it or would you?
I think that something about like the cascading weirder and weirder thought experiments somehow makes you forget that the original thought experiment makes no sense at all. Like, you're like, okay, we're facing climate change, but what if there was an enormous asteroid that was going to destroy all life on Earth in an instant coming at us? Like, we might as well give up on climate change. And like, this thing's, it's like saying to, someone like, you've been diagnosed with with potentially terminal but treatable cancer. But what if someone had a gun to your head? Like,
this is
like, it's like, wait, it's not the same thing.
He's basically, the argument that he's putting forward, it is kind of an Epicurean one, whether he realizes it or not, which is like, well, if like the rest of your life from here on out is basically going to be not very good, you may as well die, because that's not, you can't have a bad time when you're dead. However, when he's making this argument in light of climate change, it's like, no, climate change, if it does kill us, is going to kill us all very slowly and painfully. So is this guy suggesting that we have some kind of like Brian Jonestown style fucking like suicide pact?
And like, the more you give up, the more painful it gets. Like it.
Yeah, the Brian Jonestown massacre. We're gonna get that band to kill everyone. They're gonna get us and Geronimo the alpaca, and then they can kill themselves.
Jonestown, named after the Brian Jonestown massacre.
That's right. Before turning the pop rock on themselves.
But I gotta keep going with this because this is really incredible. Imagine that the devil offers you a choice between a year of the most appalling agony imaginable.
Okay, I take it. Yes. Yes. Thank you. Yes. Next question.
And some period with a barely perceptible headache. Some would take the second option, however long the headache lasted. Perhaps even if it were to last for eternity. Since we are considering whether extinction might be better than continuing to exist, the question arises whether some pains would be so great that they outweigh any number of pleasures or other goods. To avoid the worries that arise from imagining large numbers, consider just one kind of pain, undoubtedly the worst that any sentient being could experience, that of torture by electric shock.
That's pretty cool, actually.
One recent victim of such torture...
us in the sounding community, we really don't appreciate this being...
I've been saying this for years.
We got any sounding heads out there? I'm sure we do.
Depends which head.
Hey.
One recent victim of such torture described it as like they're breaking every bone of every joint in your body at the same time. Along with sheer physical agony of such torture go many emotional horrors, dread, terror, panic, humiliation, degradation, despair.
This is a thing, right? Like, once you spend too long in academia, for some reason, it happens to lawyers too, you just start envisioning torturing people in some sort of platonic way. Like, I've lost count of the number of law professors who have just been like, well, okay, but just as a thought experiment, if we were to start putting, like, needles under people's fingernails, and you're just like, you realize that you are the only person who is saying.
Well, I mean, also there's just the extent to which, like, the weird juxtaposition of this being an academic philosopher from Oxford writing in the New Statesman, you know, or like you said, a sort of center-left magazine, not notionally center-left magazine in the UK, and it's basically like opening up Sky Mall, and it's got an offer that you can challenge the devil to a fiddling contest. Like, it makes no fucking sense. So I'm just going to continue to get through this. Now consider some relatively short period of such torture, an hour, say, and return to C.I. Lewis's thought experiment. Imagine a choice between, on one hand, the non-existence of immediate extinction, and on the other, an hour of electric shock torture followed by some period of pleasure and other goods. Which would you choose?
Well, but what if I could combine the hour of electric shock torture and the period of pleasure?
Well, also, like, what kills me about it is, like,
one easy payment.
There are undeniably people who have been tortured by electric shock torture who are alive now. Like, maybe ask them, like, hey, would it be better if, like, we just killed everyone on this planet?
Would you prefer to have been hit by a meteoroid?
Would you have preferred Sephiroth 1 in Final Fantasy 7?
I am getting £2,000 a day from All Souls College to go around asking victims of torture whether they would rather have been hit by a fucking asteroid.
Yeah.
This is such a normal country.
ISIS's new technique of just firing asteroids at captured soldiers.
It's very. I feel like it's very much the extension of that, like, we live in society meme, or like the whole that meme where it's like we should improve society somewhat, and he's the guy who's just like, maybe instead of improving society somewhat, we should just, like,
get hit by an asteroid.
Wait to die by getting hit by an asteroid.
Like, my analogy to this is, like, and my cop-out for this is, your thought experiment is stupid because none of us could control any situation like this. Like, okay, fine, we're doing the trolley problem. I'm not the guy with the lever. I'm the guy tied to the trolley tracks, as is everyone else.
And also, like, the idea of there's operating on this incredibly, you know, extended hypothetical that it's like, well, an asteroid is on a direct course for Earth, but we also have a black mage who could cast Reflect. Should he do that? Like, all of this is just, it just seems like a really, really done up parody of this kind of thought experiment. But what I'm going to do is I want to get through there's 5 more paragraphs. I feel as though we can expand our brain palaces in a brief span of time.
Please, I would love to.
Not, brackets, I hope, having been tortured, you might want to ask one of its victims just how bad it is. Unfortunately, it is common for such victims to say it is impossible to convey the badness. Jacobo Timmerman, for example, was tortured in Argentina and said, in the long months of confinement, I often thought about how to transmit the pain that a tortured person undergoes, and I always concluded that it was impossible. It's a pain without points of reference, revelatory symbols, or clues to serve as indicators. Another problem.
And why would you write the fucking article then?
Yeah. I guess that £200 fucking freelancer fee. He needed more than $2,000 a day from All Souls College to go around buying every computer in Oxford.
The only people I have ever met who could understand my pain were horny trans women on the internet. I do not know why.
Another problem is that it appears to be hard to remember the true nature of agony. Harriet Martineau, who suffered terribly through her life from a uterine tumor, once said during a period of remission, "Where are these pains now? Not only gone, but annihilated. They are destroyed so utterly that even memory can lay no hold upon them." Perhaps one reason we think extinction would be bad is that we have failed to recognize just how awful extreme agony is. Nevertheless, we have enough evidence and imaginative capacity to say that it's not unreasonable to see the pain of an hour of torture as something that can never be counterbalanced by any amount of positive value. And if this view is correct, then it suggests the best outcome would be for the immediate extinction that follows from allowing an asteroid to hit our planet.
Yeah, okay. I'm gonna turn the asteroid on myself and everybody else because torture exists.
If this view is correct, it suggests that you're a fucking nerd. Shut the fuck up.
Because it's more like, or we could stop people doing torture. That there's a way, like, you know, we could actually.
No.
It's happened before, and thus because it's happened, Genova has to fucking destroy this entire planet. Like, that's just the way it's going to work.
The planet's dying, Cloud.
Exactly. You have to let Midgar collapse on you because somewhere, somehow, someone stubbed their fucking toe. And you know what? That did hurt really intensely for a brief instant. Last two paragraphs. Of course, allowing an asteroid to hit Earth would probably be bad for you. I love England. I fucking love England. You get to write this in a major magazine. Allowing an asteroid
to be bad for your portfolio of buy-to-let properties. That can be said, and in that respect, that is worse than an hour of torture.
As the asteroid closes in, the Daily Mail is worrying about house prices.
Yeah. Of course, allowing an asteroid to hit the Earth would probably be bad for you and those close to you. But given what's at stake, it may well be that you should pay these costs to prevent all the suffering. As the philosopher Bernard Williams once said, if for a moment we got anything like an adequate idea of the suffering in the world and we really guided our actions by it, then surely we would annihilate the planet if we could.
Do you know what's a
Speaking
better...
with a belt around his neck and an orange in his mouth, this man said.
Do you know what a better philosophical discussion and thought experiment is than this?
What?
It's the tweet that says it is part of catechism. It is Catholic belief that when Christ was decided to sacrifice his life in Gethsemane, he saw every human sin, which meant that he saw a guy blasting rope to anime and still decided to sacrifice
Alice,
his life.
You're remembering it wrong.
That's a sacrament.
He said blasting rope to Waluigi porn. Because I remember that tweet.
That's a better philosophical inquiry than this is.
I'm not Christian, but I absolutely remember that tweet. I was like, all right, I get down with the spirit of that.
I'm not Christian, but I absolutely believe that whilst Jesus was not the Messiah, according to the Jews, he did nevertheless see a guy blasting rope to Waluigi porn. And for that reason, he was a very good Jew, but not the Messiah.
The question of whether extinction would be good or bad overall is obviously very important, especially in the face of potential catastrophic events at the hinge of history. But this question is also very difficult to answer. Ultimately, I'm not claiming that an extinction would be good, only that since it might be, we should devote a lot more attention to thinking about the value of extinction than we have to date. The end.
Shut the fuck up.
Why? Because we might decide to extinct ourselves. Like, what would be the possible, like, productive outcome of thinking about that? Like, even if he's right, like, what is he... what I can't understand is what the fuck is his suggestion?
We think about it more.
There's something about the way that he sets this up, that like the possibility of some unknown suffering in the future means that we should never go on. It just suggests he's like never suffered. Like he's just like, the idea is just, it's, he's led, and I don't know the guy, but like he's lived, it seems like the kind of thing you can only suggest after having lived like the cosseted life of an Oxford Don, born during like the sweet spot of history for like.
Why the fuck isn't there like immeasurable joy being taken into consideration here either?
Like there's like a lot of really good jokes on Twitter, and like if an asteroid hits,
the guy blasting rope to like Waluigi porn.
I don't want to live in a world where I don't see the blasting rope to Waluigi. I do want to live in the world where I do see that tweet, and I want to think about that tweet and visualize it in my mind. That's the joy of being alive.
This guy wrote this article immediately after at his like eyes wide shut dinner in an Oxford college, the claret had run out, and then he noticed that the twink whose thigh he was stroking had left.
Right.
And he was like, what is the point?
I was not expecting such a like forceful statement in defense of like humanity and our right to exist from the podcast that I do with my friends, but
well, the point I would make too is that, I mean, and you can connect it to a larger point, that in this the sort of face of this complete conservative hegemony in this country, and the sort of like lol nothing matters that has happened with just, I mean, this is my armchair sort of analysis here of post-COVID and post the 2019 election and post-Brexit and all this stuff, that basically like, oh yeah, corruption's legal, nothing matters, do whatever the fuck you want, like it's the law of the jungle. There's this extent to which it's been very weird to watch people try to like adopt a kind of very calming, pleasant tone to sell you on being completely black-pilled. And it's like, this reads like the council has written you a letter saying we're going to burn your house down with you in it. And it's just...
Yeah. Keir Starmer reading this entire column to an alpaca.
Perhaps you might
when
consider.
you consider,
I welcome good things, but I would also encourage the government to go further by killing me. Because bad things also happen. And that is something which, on the left, we must take into account. That good things are good, but bad things are also bad. And sometimes bad things are badder than good things are good.
Well, on that note, it falls only to me to say, Alex, thank you so much for making time to be on the show today. Please plug your Ghost, the non-turf alternative to Substack, and all the other content.
Yeah, sure. So I'm just a guy who posts. I have a newsletter. The URL is alex-yablon.ghost.io. And, I kind of like basically do the stuff I can't get editors elsewhere to publish. I put it up there, like my thoughts on like bond markets and post-punk and like, recipes I want to make and like how much, doing a close reads of like, doing pop psychology on billionaires based on their bad memoirs. So if you want to read that kind of stuff, you should subscribe to my Ghost. And then I write elsewhere for a bunch of other places. I'm a contributing opinion writer at Business Insider, where I do somewhat regular columns about all the kinds of stuff that we've been talking about here.
Embracing the void. Drinking the Kool-Aid.
Waluigi porn.
It's a regular roundup of the best Waluigi porn on the market. And to be honest with you, Alex, I've not read a better one. I think yours really does.
Well, thank you. And I think just to understand the potential, the great hinge we're in, the potential move beyond neoliberalism, the kind of the meeting of the climate crisis. You've got to look at the Waluigi porn. It's all there.
Well, we will link to your Ghost, your Ghost page in the show notes, as well as to your Twitter. I love saying subscribe to my Ghost. That sounds like something that would have gotten an 8.9 on Pitchfork in 2005.
Oh my God.
Hauntology is when you subscribe to Alex's Ghost.
Exactly.
And as you all know, we have
please goop on my Grinch. It's vital to my income.
It's the haunting tier.
Yes.
So we also have a Patreon, and
you can spook us up on
exactly.
Our
you can subscribe to our Ghosts on.
You can goop on our collective Grinch.
The link is in the show notes as well. $5 a month gets you tons of bonus content, and the $10 tier gets you 2 Britanologies a month. We also have Milo's shows, which are
Masters of Our Domain. Listen to that. It's a cool podcast. I do it with Phoebe. You've probably heard of Phoebe. We talk about Seinfeld, but not really. I am doing a preview on the 24th of this month, August, at the Seckford. There will be a ticket link in the description to this episode.
And Hussein has a show, multiple shows to plug.
I have 2 shows, yeah. We have 10K posts with Phoebe as well.
Yeah.
People are getting kind of convinced that she is real.
More and more people are asking, who is Phoebe?
Where did she come from? Who's funding her?
There were genuinely some hogs who thought that Phoebe had won like some kind of fucker fan contest to do podcast with us, but not understanding the concept of having friends.
That's right. Yeah, friends don't exist. They're all just they're all patrons. And also
it's colonialist to have friends.
Right. And speaking of shows that you can listen for free, you should also listen to Human Error on BBC Sounds. I do that with friend of the show, Olga Koch. Yeah. And that's very good too. And
also, quick plug for killing yourself before things
and
get
your
bad.
whole family.
Dignitas.
Consider killing your whole family as well.
Norwegian style.
Which podcast? Which podcast would you listen to as the asteroid comes to destroy you? Mine would be Pod Save America.
The name universe.
Which Trashfuture bit would you be playing when the asteroid impacted?
Builders Valhalla.
Builders Valhalla. Exactly.
Builders Valhalla.
Alice, of course, you have your show as well. A show about James Bond.
Yeah, and about how we must kill James Bond because his existence is meaningless. So kill James Bond.
Oh, I want to add one thing about the James Bond. There was a piece I was just reading in the London Review of Books. Did you know that Ian Fleming actually came up with the idea for the CIA? the article is Spy Masters by Charles Glass, and Alexander Cockburn blamed Ian Fleming for the creation of the CIA.
Well, Alexander Cockburn kind of blamed a lot of people for a lot of things, mostly justly, but in a kind of like vitriolic way, which we would never do.
No. But Fleming was a naval intelligence officer, and he was sent to Washington in 1941, and he was whisked off to a room in a new annex of the embassy, locked in with a pen and paper and the necessities of life, a colleague recalled. And there he wrote, under armed guard, around the clock, a document of some 70 pages covering every aspect of a giant secret intelligence and secret operational organization. He then handed it to Wild Bill Donovan, who was the guy who set up the OSS, who basically stole it.
Yeah, and then and then I didn't see what happened after that.
Right, exactly. And then that became the CIA. So yes, Ian Fleming created the CIA.
And that's why this podcast is about to get cut off suddenly mid-sentence.
So yes, I agree. We need to kill James Bond.
Kill James Bond. Listen to Kill James Bond. Listen to Hell of a Way. I won't plug it too long. Yeah. And thank you very much for listening, and we will talk to you next week.
Bye-bye.